Hello and welcome to the Carlyle podcast. This episode will be at least one of two episodes dedicated to my honours dissertation titled How Enhanced Media Coverage Post-1992 has led to an increase of foreign ownership in English football. The first of my interviewees is Kieran Maguire, the country's leading expert in football finance, lecturer, author and co-host of the brilliant podcast The Price of Football, which is also the title of his book. So, Kieran, thanks an awful lot for helping out with my dissertation. I haven't missed anything there, have I, in terms of what you do and what your responsibilities are?
Checks in the post for all the kind things you said about me, Max.
I seen the tweet about the numbers for the podcast. It's doing really well, isn't it?
Yeah, we've got around about 25,000 downloads a week now. It's been surprisingly popular. When it was first pitched to me, I thought we'd get 3 episodes of 37 people listening and then just abandon it as a bad idea and go back down the pub.
You know, obviously, with the realm of podcasts, there's such a variety that you can choose from in terms of like your length and that ability to cram so much information that there seems to be a real appetite for into 30 minutes or so. I'd say it was a talent, to be fair.
I think we're quite fortunate that we've got somebody from BBC Business, BBC Sport in Guy Kilty, and he said aim for something 30 to 40 minutes long, and then we do the shorter listeners' questions as a shorter show. And I'm very, very fortunate that we managed to persuade Kevin to join the team, because I've never met him in my life.
Yeah, Kevin Day.
Kevin Day. He's host of Match of the Day too. He's well known in comedy circles as well. He writes the scripts for Have I Got News for You and 8 out of 10 Cats. So somebody of that calibre, just to accept an offer from a nobody on Twitter, it's worked really well, and he's a fantastic guy to work with because he's got the ability to keep me in check when I start being too geeky and ask the right questions as well.
I think you're doing yourself a disservice there. I wouldn't say you're a nobody from Twitter. I would consider you, along with Swiss Ramble, as like football and royalty in terms of football finance. I'm going to kind of segment this. With it being my dissertation, I have got to transcribe it. So one half will be strictly related to the topic, but just to kickstart, I like asking people football and sport related questions. Firstly, what's the best game that you've been to?
The best game I've been to was FA Cup 5th round 1983, Liverpool versus Brighton. Jimmy Case scoring the winner for Brighton in front of the Kop with Jimmy Melia as our manager. I was 20 years old at the time. Liverpool fans were absolutely brilliant on the day because 2 of their own had contributed towards the defeat, and they're on the way to win the league that season, so they didn't mind giving one of the trophies away.
The best player that you've ever seen play live?
The best player I've ever seen live was Ruud Gullit. I saw him play for, I think it was at Chelsea, at Manchester City. It was one of those games where he decided he was just going to turn it on, and to see somebody so far ahead of all of the opposition, all the other 21 players on the pitch. He had everything. He had strength, he had speed, he had guile. He was absolutely magnificent. And to see somebody at the top of their game, you just realise just how fortunate you are at times. Football in this country has benefited hugely from players of that calibre joining the Premier League, and we've been fortunate enough to see it.
Definitely, and globalisation is something that we'll touch on. Just finally, don't necessarily had to seen it live, but what's your favourite ever goal?
Favourite ever goal? I think it was Sergio Aguero's goal to win the Premier League for Manchester City, because it encapsulated everything in football. You had another team celebrating winning the Premier League at the time. It was pure drama, pure theatre. The goal itself wasn't brilliant, but the moment was just incredible. And I'm speaking not as a Manchester City fan.
I was at Everton Newcastle that final day of the season too, and showing on the screen people's reactions, the drama between United and Sunderland and City QPR, it certainly was absolutely brilliant. Now to switch the focus to my dissertation, which, as I said, is how enhanced media coverage post-1992 has led to the increase of foreign ownership in English football. Firstly, just to touch on the early days, because I've talked about it a fair bit in my literature review, is the relationship between the governing bodies prior to 92 going into the inception of the Premier League. How did the business models of the governing bodies, so the FA and the EFL, change during that time? Because I know for the clubs, their methods of generating revenue was very localised and predicated on match day revenue. And obviously post 92, that completely turned on its head.
I think there was a great distrust of television. It was seen as a threat to the game. The fear of club owners before 92 was that if games were broadcast live, then fans wouldn't turn up. That was the view held by the FA as well. So therefore, they were very reluctant for live TV to take place, and they didn't see the significance of TV revenues because the deals that had been signed by the governing bodies, they'd effectively been outmanoeuvred by the broadcasting companies who were acquiring the rights for practically nothing. And as a consequence, you could see the logic from the point of view of the Football League and the FA, given that they weren't receiving very much money from TV rights. Why allow TV and broadcasting a greater say in the way that matches were going to be played and scheduled, given that the rewards, in their perception, weren't going to arrive?
And if my research serves me correctly, I believe the Football League jumped the gun with their relationship with ITV Digital, which certainly led to a downfall, which you could argue they're paying the price for today.
Yes, I think the Football League, as a body, it quickly realised that the gap between the Premier League and the EFL was huge. Sky were willing to pay fairly modest fees for the rights. ITV Digital came through, and everybody in the EFL thought they just won the lottery. They hadn't done their homework. They thought that people would automatically generate the same viewing figures as were being provided by Premier League clubs, but they hadn't done their homework because they were comparing Leeds versus Nottingham Forest to the same audience as Liverpool versus Manchester United, on the grounds that Leeds and Forest were big clubs. But whilst they are big clubs in a very small pond, as opposed to Liverpool and Manchester United being big clubs in a far bigger pond and a global pond as that. For me, as a fan, I think the Championship's the most exciting division, possibly in Europe, in terms of its unpredictability, but it is very local, and therefore ITV overpaid for the rights. The audiences never arrived. They didn't have a subscription model, so they were relying on advertisements. The advertisers went away very quickly because they didn't see the subscriber numbers or the viewing figures materialising as being promised, and it very quickly collapsed upon itself. I think if they tried something today of a similar nature, I think they would have far more data and information to make a more nuanced, a more valid bid. But I do think it's a case of be very wary when there's all this talk of PL2 and the value of that, because I think that's overestimated in the eyes of club owners of clubs in the Championship.
Definitely, and I've quoted that from one of your recent podcasts, which you said the Championship clubs certainly had an inflated sense of self-worth. Could you just touch on the discrepancy in the revenue that's generated from the Sky's relationship with the Premier League compared to Sky's relationship with the Championship now?
Yeah, the Sky deal with the EFL works out as around about £2.3 million per club, and in the Premier League you're looking at somewhere between 100 and 160 million. On top of the 2.3 million that the clubs get from the EFL, and there's a lot of criticism of the Premier League, but what I think most fans fail to realise is that the Premier League are giving 4.3 million, so it's almost twice as much as the EFL itself generates in what's referred to as solidarity payments to EFL clubs as a means of offering them some form of financial support. Now, in respect of that, what does the PL get in return? It gets acceptance of the Elite Player Performance Plan, which has, I think, probably more long-term consequences for EFL clubs than they realise. But as club owners and as fans, and many people connected with the game have such short-term perspectives, they probably don't realise that they have sold their club's future in terms of their ability to generate future players very, very cheaply.
Just to touch on, and you highlighted some of them there, the differences in the rules and regulations of the Football League in comparison to the Premier League. I think it was 2010 when FFP was introduced. In the Premier League, you can lose 105 million over 3 years, whereas in the Championship, you can only lose 39 million. And that changes once again when you're talking about European competition. So as UEFA, as a governing body, you can lose 30 million over 3 years. Why is that?
UEFA have a slightly different objective compared to the Premier League. Ultimately, these decisions are made by club owners, whereas UEFA tends to be more of an independent body. In respect of financial fair play, we can have, therefore, a crazy situation that a club could satisfy the Premier League's rules for FFP by making a loss of, say, 80 or 90 million within the 3-year framework, then qualify for Europe and then instantly finds that it's in breach of the UEFA rules. So for clubs like Wolves, who have got to the Premier League, they played good football. They are competing for, they're in Europa League this year. I think if they incur significant losses in the Premier League in the way that they did in the EFL, that they could be on a bit of a sticky wicket.
And again, just to sort of touch on the change in financial strategy, another really interesting fact I found from one of your podcasts is for every £1 spent on wages in 92 is now £315, which in inflation terms is absolutely bizarre. So just could you sort of compare the football economy and the business models and structure to other industries and just how that is?
Well, football is a talent industry, and the reason why the clubs have the ability to pay the wages is that the talent, that the people that we watch on a regular basis, they have delivered viewing figures to broadcast companies, which have elevated footballers from... When I grew up in football was very much, it was a working class game played by working class people, and it was cheap to go to matches. There was no TV money coming in, and players were paid accordingly. What we've seen as a result of the Premier League becoming the world's most popular team sport, in terms of a product, it's more popular than the NFL, it's more than La Liga, and so on, is that overseas broadcasters in particular, who initially were given the rights for the Premier League for nothing, they quickly realised that these rights, when it came to subscribers resubscribing, these were the crack cocaine of broadcasting, and therefore they were willing to pay more and more. Now, if the broadcasters are willing to pay more and more to the clubs, then the agents of the players will say, we know that in order to get hold of that money, you need to be a member of the Premier League, you need to pay our client accordingly. If the TV rights have just increased in value by 70%, why can't our client have a pay rise of 70% as well? And if you actually track wages to income, you will see that there's a very, very close correlation between the two. So every time a new TV deal comes into existence, you see players, it's announced that they've had contract extensions, and the players that are coming to the club, they're automatically expecting wages to be in line with the latest TV deal. It's what Sir Alan Sugar refers to as the prune juice effect. Effectively, as extra money comes into the game, it's going straight out again in the form of player wages. Whilst there is for some reason there seems to be a lot of envy and criticism of footballers' wages, and yet that's not the same in other environments. Football is now in the entertainment industry. If I go to watch a film and it features Tom Hanks, I don't at the end of the film say that was a bad film because Tom Hanks earned £12 million. It was either a good film or a bad film. And yet football fans, to a large extent, I think they are being shaped by the print media and social media. They say, I no longer enjoy football because footballers are being paid so much. Footballers didn't destroy the world economy in 2007. That was done by bankers. I don't see anybody going to banks and say, I'm not going to operate with this bank anymore. I'm going to close down my account because all you bankers destroyed the world economy. So it's a very unusual environment that we find ourselves in that footballers are being criticised for simply doing their job well. It's a very competitive industry, and it's a pure talent industry. There's so many other industries in the world where you are given your job because you happen to be a friend of or a relative of another executive in the business. In football, if you're not good enough, you're out of the first team. You're into the reserves. You get sold on to a lower league club, and quickly the money dries up. So, are footballers well paid? Yes, they are. Are they paid the right amount? The markets would say yes, because nobody forces the clubs to pay them those amounts of money.
That's the argument. If the money's going to go anywhere, it should go to the players, in effect.
That's right. What are the alternatives? The alternatives, you end up with an American-style franchise system where the money goes to the owners. Now, the owners are already multi-millionaires and billionaires. I would much rather the money go into the pocket of somebody like Stevie Gerrard or Paul Scholes, who have come from working class cities in the northwest of England, than go to somebody who came from a family which was already wealthy, was educated at Harvard, and is going to be wealthy independent of what they actually offer to the company. Footballers offer us escape. They provide a level of entertainment which can bring joy which is unparalleled. I always maintain, if I had to list the top 10 moments of my life, probably 6 of them would involve football matches, and for that I don't resent the players earning the money.
You touched on it briefly there, the influence of the American sports industry. I do talk extensively about this in the literature review. Obviously it doesn't abide to the single entity franchise system, but that evolution of a sport and practice to a product now is certainly undeniable, isn't it?
Very much so. I think that the main difference between American sport and what we have here in Europe is that American franchise sport, because there's no concept of relegation, is very much geared towards profit maximisation, and sporting performance comes second. So you can have sports franchises being worth billions of dollars in the States, but I think it's the New York Knicks who, because they own their own stadium and they own their own broadcasting rights, they're probably still worth more than 90%, 95% of football clubs in the planet, and yet they finish bottom of their division on a quite regular basis. Here in Europe, it's all about sporting performance. As you're an Everton fan, I'm a Brighton fan. If our clubs won the Financial Fair Play Trophy, we wouldn't be cheering them around the town with an open-top bus. It's all to do with the sport, and I think the two models are very interesting to review side by side, because there's different attitudes of owners. There's certainly different attitudes of fans in terms of what are the priorities.
To be honest, I think it's coming up nearly 30 years since we've won a trophy, so I wouldn't speak too soon about that. Just on, in relation to the championship, obviously I'm in my final year at UCFB now, and the work experience that I've had, funnily enough, I know I mentioned that I worked with the City Football Group, but I've also worked with Bolton and I've also worked with Bury, two teams with quite an opposite fate given the current climate. And something that I feel kind of relating to the ITV Digital deal is that wages were certainly overpromised by clubs to players, and that largely came to their detriment, did it not?
Yes. I think a lot of contracts were negotiated with players when the ITV Digital deal was signed on the basis of a certain level of income being guaranteed to clubs. When ITV pretty much weaseled their way around that by saying that ITV Digital had nothing to do with ITV, so therefore when ITV Digital went bust, ITV just washed their hands of the whole affair, and they didn't abide to the contract. The football clubs had signed 3-year, 4-year contracts with players on a certain level of wage, and the football clubs, all of a sudden, they had this huge vacuum because they were anticipating a level of broadcast income being generated, and that proved to be not the case. They immediately then signed a deal with Sky on greatly reduced terms, but they weren't able to pass that reduction on to players, who quite rightly said, we signed our contracts in good faith. If you breach the contract by paying us lower wages, we're entitled to move away. And that the football industry is different to other industries in the sense that other industries don't have the transfer system. So if you've got a player who's on a good wage, you say, I'm going to give you a 40% pay cut, yet that player could be worth £3 or £4 million in the transfer market, and that's what they would lose out on in terms of the total cash flow generated from the player.
Just to wrap up on in regards to the broadcasting rights and then move on to foreign ownership. Obviously now we've seen the introduction of Amazon into the market, which has started rumblings of the Premier League starting their own OTT service. What are your projections for the future of sports broadcasting?
I think that the Premier League will consider dipping their toe into the market of a streamlined service where they do everything, perhaps in the next round of broadcasting. At present, just under half the fixtures of the Premier League are shown live on television. That means that they've got another 200 matches a season which could be sold. In terms of an OTT service, I think it will come. I think there will be more consumer choice, and there will be winners and losers in terms of the clubs, because the elite clubs, the big six, they're in a very strong negotiating position, because with the best will in the world, I went to a match last Saturday which kicked off at 5:30 for football TV purposes, but nobody actually wants to watch Brighton versus Watford. I'm fully aware as a fan, if that had been Liverpool versus Spurs, if that had been Manchester United versus Chelsea, the viewing figures would have been 4 or 5 times as much. At present, the way that the money is distributed is quite democratic between all 20 members of the Premier League. I suspect that the introduction of an OTT service will lead to a stretch, and the elite clubs getting a far greater proportion of the total broadcasting income. Is that good for football? I think what little romance exists in football will finally evaporate. Leicester City winning the Premier League in 2016 was a magical fairy story, and ever since then the elite clubs have done everything in their power to prevent that arising again by taking more and more of the money, as we've seen in the latest round of matches. Some of the figures that have been bandied about, that clubs will be making £1 billion a year from TV rights, I think those are pie in the sky. I think the people making those claims don't realise that there's costs of production and costs of distribution. If you take a look at what you can acquire at present from NBC in the States, you can have your Premier League pass, which practically gives you every game in the Premier League, and I think that costs £50 or $50. So how people can then work out that people in countries which are far less wealthy than the USA are going to pay £10 a month, the numbers simply don't stack up. People haven't done their homework, and they haven't analysed the data and the demographics in sufficient detail. Can the Premier League clubs make more money? Yes. The claims that are being made are overstated in my view, and they're completely ignoring the associated costs and risks. At present, Premier League clubs know that they've got zero risk. They are guaranteed the monies from Sky and BT. I think they need to analyse this in more depth.
True, and I certainly would say in terms of foreign broadcast rights, Sky certainly seems to be the limit, as domestic rights, if I'm right, have plateaued. The foreign rights just continue to grow, and I must add as well, in terms of strategic placement for Amazon to have that, the acquisition of games over that Christmas period was very, very smart.
Absolute masterstroke.
Yeah,
absolute masterstroke.
Brilliant. And just to wrap up now and finish on foreign ownership, globalization has been for the Premier League. It's been absolutely fantastic for it. How many clubs is it that are foreign owned?
Premier League, I think it's 11 or 12. you've got West Ham, they're British owned,
Yeah.
Brighton are British owned. But I think whilst it's the majority,
Okay.
but why have these foreign owners come into the Premier League? I think it's a sign of the success. I think it's actually a pat on the back for the league that they have a fantastic product, and the owners know that by buying a Premier League club or a club that has the ability to get into the Premier League, you have the kudos in your home country, you have the kudos in your peer group of friends of owning something which is practically unique. There are only 20 such owners, and if you can go to your friends, if you're moving in the realms of the uber elite, the uber rich, they've all got yachts, they've all got helicopters, they've all got massive chateaus, but you might be the only one that next week is hosting Chelsea at home in whatever football ground you've got.
True.
So the prices that they're prepared to pay come at a huge premium, and the amount of money that these people are prepared to pay to keep those clubs going, because the majority of the clubs in the Premier League are still losing money despite all the money that's coming in. It's the same way that they would approach owning an elite racehorse or something of that. It's the fact that they can go into the winner's enclosure, or they can say, I am a Premier League club owner. That opens doors. That allows some owners in their home countries to go and negotiate contracts, because they can go to somebody and say, well, okay, let's sign this particular deal. By the way, if we sign it, you fancy coming into the director's box next week? We've got Liverpool at home. And given the appeal of the Premier League, people are going to say, yeah, I want that, because it's a level of entertainment, it's a level of achievement which very few people can hope to exceed to.
And outside of that top six, they still, like, clubs still are, really attractive assets to potentially attain. And I think this kind of comes into the question of value creation for those owners. For owners that aren't owners of clubs within that top six, where does that come in?
The value is created in the sense that they feel that in a few years' time, if they so desire, they can flip the club. So whilst they won't make any money during their tenure of ownership, they know that because there is so few football clubs available to buy, they carry a premium price. So Newcastle United is it's barely breaking even in the Premier League. Why is Mike Ashley able to sell it for a quoted 340 million pounds? Because there's only going to be one or two Premier League clubs coming on the market every 1 or 2 years, and therefore there's lots of people that want to buy them. It then comes down to simple supply and demand. The demand is there for this elite, this trophy asset, and the supply is very restricted. As a consequence, prices rise. Okay,
brilliant. Kieran, I'd just like to thanks for the time. It really does mean a lot, and I hope to do another one of these soon.
Great to meet you.
Brilliant.
And good luck with the dissertation.
Thanks. And the next interviewee for my dissertation is going to be the sports lawyer Daniel G. I'm going down to London for that, so I'm very much looking forward to that.